Hello, and welcome to the AAPS orientation for the 2023-2024 school year. We're so excited that you are volunteering at AAPS. My name is Nancy Shore, and I'm going to walk you through this orientation to give you a good grounding for when you are working with our students, and we're going to get started. So let's do it. Okay. Once again, thank you so much for taking some time to volunteer with AAPS students. It's really exciting to have you here. I first and foremost want to welcome you to Ann Arbor Public Schools. Everybody who volunteers at AAPS is part of our community. We want you to feel that you are part of this community. We want to embrace you. And so we are hoping that this orientation will serve as an initial kickoff and a way for you to feel like you're going to know what to do right when you get in there. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about a lot of different things, and this is really intended first as an orientation to get you started, but we hope that you can come back to these slides, which will be available to you in the AAPS volunteer guide, as well as on Better Impact, when you have a question or you want to resolve an issue. So what we're going to talk about today is we are going to go over Ann Arbor Public Schools. We are going to tell you a little bit about your role at our schools as a volunteer. We're going to share how to recognize and report abuse, how to have some great success with your Ann Arbor Public Schools contact, how you can best prepare for your placement in Ann Arbor Public Schools. Then we'll provide a little bit of hints and tips on student behavior strategies, and finally give you a sense of what your next steps are as you continue to move on to the onboarding process. So let's keep going. So what about AAPS? You may never have been in any of our schools. It's maybe have been a while since you've been at a public school ever. And it also may be that you are new to this area. So we want to give you a little bit of information about Ann Arbor Public Schools to get you started. So first of all, we want to introduce ourselves. We are your team. And again, our goal is that you have a positive experience onboarding and getting yourself ready to volunteer. My name is Nancy Shore, and I direct strategic partnerships and community engagement here at Ann Arbor Public Schools. And then there's Jen Myers, and Jen Myers is our office professional in the community division. And she's going to be responsible for a lot of the communication that you're going to receive. You'll see emails. So you're probably going to get pretty familiar with her name. So I just want to make sure that you know who we are. And I want to say hi. So now a little bit about Ann Arbor Public Schools to help you get a little bit of grounding in what our schools are like. So we have a little over 17,000 students, and of those students, 1 in 8 has a special need requiring an IEP or individualized education plan. 1 in 4 are from homes impacted by poverty, and 1 in 10 speak a language other than English in their home. So as you look at these statistics, some things may be surprising to you that you might have not expected, such as the fact that we do have about a quarter of our students that are from homes impacted by poverty. So the reality is Ann Arbor is a very economically diverse community. We both have students in a classroom whose parents may be surgeons at Michigan Medicine, and also students in the classroom whose parents may work in janitorial services at Michigan Medicine. So this presents a lot of opportunities as well as challenges in terms of how the classrooms are and how the students may interact with one another. Something else to note is that our English language learner population continues to increase. We see pretty significant increases every year. Some of our top languages are Spanish, Korean, Arabic, Japanese. And so you may be working with the student. If you are working as an English language learner volunteer, we're really excited to have you because there's going to definitely be a need for that in our schools, as well as anybody else who is volunteering. Also, something to note is that most of our classrooms have about 20 or 30 students. So chances are you are going to be in a classroom with a student that's going to either have a special need, be in a home impacted by poverty, or have a language other than English spoken in their school, in their classroom. And so that is really going to be an interesting challenge with you. And I think a lot of what we want you to come away with is understand that when you come to our schools, there's going to be a lot of diversity economically, racially, in terms of ethnicity. And so be prepared for that and think about maybe how you can prepare if you haven't been in an environment that has had some of these differences. Also, something interesting to note is that our schools are very different depending on where they're located. So because of some of the economic segregation in our community, you may be at a school that is a Title I school that has more students who have experienced poverty, or you may be at a school that has a much lower proportion of students experiencing poverty. And so once you get to your school, you're going to be able to learn more and understand those dynamics. So another great way to learn more about Ann Arbor Public Schools is through all of our different social media platforms, as well as our information services. So of course, our main website, you can find us on social media. We've got a great news site, news.a2schools.org. And then we do also have a podcast. So if you're ever out walking your dog or going between classes at the University of Michigan, make sure to pop in that podcast to get all kinds of interesting news and information. And one of the great things that you can also do is you should know what school or schools you're going to be volunteering at. And so you can always go to one of these different platforms and look for specific information about your school, which will really help you get up to speed about what's going on in your school, who are the people, what's going on in their events and activities. So that's a really great thing you can do to get started. So another thing to be aware of is that you are going to be walking into a building, and any building has emergencies from time to time. It's pretty unlikely that you will encounter one, but we just wanted to give you a high-level overview of what you might want to do if you encounter an emergency at a school. So bottom line, you want to remain as calm as possible, and you want to assist the teacher or your AAPS contact in whatever way they need assistance. There's lots of different emergencies you may encounter, anything from a student having a medical emergency to something happening outside of the school where they need to lock the school down. And so here's a couple of bullets on this slide that are going to give you some ideas of what you want to do. And when you get these slides in Better Impact or on the volunteer guide, there's lots more details of what you can do. But you really just want to keep in mind that whatever you do, it's really assisting the teacher and making sure that you are a person that can help. And also, please do not post anything on social media, because whatever happens, we want to be able to handle that situation before anything else gets out of hand. So you're also probably really interested in knowing when are schools not going to be out there, because we don't want you to come to a school when it's closed. So how do you find out when schools are closed? Well, we do have a calendar on our website at a2schools.org/calendar. There's also a Google Calendar that you can subscribe to. And then if you want to find out about any of our snow days or an emergency closure, that is something you can find out on our social media pages. We always put it on the front page of our a2schools.org page. It's also important for you to go onto that 2023-2024 calendar to make sure to note any early release days or any days that we're on break, so that you don't come in and nobody's there, which would be unfortunate, wouldn't it? So other things to keep in mind in terms of all about AAPS, let's go back to those key takeaways. So first of all, recognize that we do have diverse students and very different schools depending on which one you're going to be in. There's both economic diversity, racial diversity. You're going to see some diversity in terms of our English language learner population. If you do have an emergency that happens at a school, all you really need to do is remain calm, familiarize yourself with some of the emergency protocols, and do whatever you can to help the teacher. And then finally, make sure that you look at our different social media channels or our website. We will also hopefully email and text you if there is an issue at a school that is closed, so that you can find out about it. So now we're going to move on to talking a little bit more specifically about your role as an AAPS volunteer. So when we think about your role as an AAPS volunteer, and when you think about your role, we really want you to think about being a positive adult role model. So when you think about being a positive adult role model, what does that mean to you? Some of the things that may come up are being trusting, being somebody that kids can relate to, being caring, respecting students, being somebody that students can rely on. So all of those things are really how we want you to present your role at our schools. So really think about, how can I be the best positive adult role model that I can be? Because you really want the students to see what it's like to be a successful adult. So one of the top goals that you can have as an AAPS volunteer, and a way to really show that you're a positive adult role model, is to get to know the students that you're working with. And there's lots of different ways that you can get to know students and different aspects of the students that you would want to get to know. So obviously you want to make sure to know their name, how to pronounce it correctly. And more, we really want you to ask about pronouns so that you can be appropriate and respectful of that student. You want to know what the student can do well, so you can maybe focus on how to enhance that, how to work with that, but also, what does that student need? What are some challenges that that student may have? In terms of culture, so you're going to come into the school with your own culture, right? You may have come from a rural community. You may have come from an even more urban community than Ann Arbor. You may be of a different race and ethnicity than the majority of the students, or you may have the same race or ethnicity. You may come from an affluent background. You may come from a background where maybe your parents are immigrants to this country. So you're going to come in with your own culture, which is going to have you're going to have your own conceptions of how people are, what school is like. And so we really ask that you try to be open and mindful of what differences the students that you're working with may have in terms of how they're approaching things, what their culture is, and really use that knowledge of what they're about and what they know to really help them succeed. That's really going to be a positive and a great strategy. Of course, something else that's really important is to understand students' interests. And so how can you get to know students? So you can start just like you would get to know anybody else at a party, or when you're in a new environment, at a new job. You want to be able to ask questions. You want to be able to do icebreakers and games. You want to be able to share information about yourself and what you like. Whatever you can do to find ways to connect and relate to the students is really going to be positive. And we also hope that your AAPS contact will help you with this by giving you some information about the students that you're working with, maybe some of the things that they're good at, maybe some of the things that they're not, maybe some of the things that you can work on with them. And also you can do some of your own research by looking around the classroom. What do you see about the students? What are the students wearing? So lots of different strategies, but we really ask that you try to prepare yourself before you come to our schools by thinking about what are some ways you can get to know students, because that really is your primary goal and is going to make everything else you do so much better. So the other thing that you're going to be doing at our schools, and this is really about being that positive adult role model, is modeling for our students. Now, when I say model, I don't mean in the strike a pose kind of modeling. I'm really talking about showing that student what it's like to be successful in school. We know that all of our students want to learn, but some of them may not have learned in their home lives or just over their time at school the best ways to get information. Maybe they need help with organizational skills. Maybe they just need help, somebody showing them sort of, here's how the steps that you take, and then letting them do it themselves. So we're definitely not saying that you should do anything for a student, but part of your role is to be that coach and guide to show them, here's the way that you can do it, and then let them have a chance to practice and show you what they know. So another thing about your role is being that positive role model, adult role model, really means that you're more like a camp counselor than you are a best friend. We don't really want volunteers to be perceived as students' friends, because one of the reasons is you're not there for very long. You're only there for a limited time. And so being a friend is really blurring that boundary between being that role model, being that coach, and being something more. And we also want to make sure that you're not sending a signal that there could be more to this relationship. And so when we think about what that means, it means things like you're not sharing your phone number with students, you're not sharing social media, you're not giving that student your address, you're not inviting them to anything. And, if any of that happens in a different context outside of being a volunteer when you're done, that's different. But while you're a volunteer, we really want you to focus on that positive adult role model relationship and focus on being a coach rather than a best friend. So a really important aspect of your role and actually a requirement by law is to recognize and support and respect student privacy. So students are going to come and talk to you about all kinds of things that are private and personal to them. It'll be their name, their birthday, what's happening in their lives, any issues they may be having or struggling with academically. And that's great because all of that may be able to help you work more effectively with that student. But what's really important also is that you keep that information confidential and only use it to support the student in the classroom. So you should not be sharing any personal information about a student outside of the classroom. So not in a paper that you're writing for a class, not with your roommate or friend or colleague when you're in a different environment, because that is actually a violation of the law. So something else that we ask just for your safety is that you are never alone with a student. So that means that you don't want to be in a situation where you're in a room by yourself with a student with a locked door. And that doesn't mean that you can't work one-on-one with the student in a classroom or out in the hallway where you're highly visible, but just make sure that there's always the eyes of an Ann Arbor Public Schools staff person on you at all times when you're working with the student. So some key takeaways about your role. So again, you are wanting to connect to students. Your number one goal is to get to know them and be that positive role model. You want to make sure absolutely to respect all privacy that students have around their personal and education records and never be alone with the student. And like many things in life, if you aren't sure about it, don't do it. So now we want to move on to recognizing and reporting abuse. So this is something that I hope that none of you ever have to experience. But if you are in a situation where there may be child abuse, we want to make sure you know what to do. So first of all, what is the definition of child abuse? So it is defined as harm or threatened harm to a child's health or welfare that occurs in a non-accidental manner, and it can be many different types of abuse. It's to a child under 18 years of age, and it's by somebody who is responsible for the child's health or welfare. So that's just the basic definition, and we're going to give you some more resources so you can do some more work later. In terms of the signs, so there's a lot of things that you can probably think about that would be signs of physical, mental, sexual, or neglect and maltreatment, abuse of different kinds. So you can see here on this slide a couple of different things that may show up, but we really encourage you to look at the resources that are on this slide. Click on them because there's a slideshow that the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services has done that talk a little bit more about how you can identify child abuse and neglect. So there are also things that are not abuse, and it's mostly because they don't involve that classic definition. It's not something that is intentionally harmful. So head lice is not something that is intentional. If you look at things like siblings, so that is not a person that is necessarily responsible for a student. So that's not considered child abuse. Obviously, if a student is experiencing poverty, while that is really challenging, that would not be considered child abuse. So all these things may still be reasons to talk to your AAPS contact and concerns, but they would not be considered child abuse. So if you do recognize something that you think is a sign of child abuse in a child, what do you do? So as a volunteer, you are not a mandated reporter, which means that you do not have to report it to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, but we do want you to tell your contact. You may not know the whole details of what's going on. Chances are you don't, and it's much more possible that the staff members that you're working with do know what's going on. So please talk to that person. If you feel like whatever happened after you talk to that person is not seeming to resolve the issue, then you always can report the incident yourself, and it will be an anonymous report. And also, please make sure that you keep anything that happens confidential, because again, this is private and we don't really know what's happening, so we don't want to create more situations. So some of the key takeaways about recognizing and reporting abuse. So again, read the signs, go into our volunteer guide and check that out. Say something if you notice something. You may be the only one who's connected to a student in a way that makes them reveal something. And so you definitely want to say something. But other than the people that you're talking to, please keep it confidential. So you may have never worked with a teacher in a classroom before. So we want to give you a little bit of an understanding of how you can be successful with your AAPS contact. So we like to think about the relationship between you and your contact as the relationship between a coxswain, who is the leader in a crew team, and the rest of the team members. So the coxswain in a crew is somebody who is guiding the whole team to do their best and to win that race. That person is directing everybody, is giving them guidance, is telling them the best ways to conduct themselves. And so that's really what your teacher and your AAPS contact is there for. They're the ones to give you the assignment, to give you the information so that you can be most successful, and to guide you so that you can make the best choices and do the best for the students. But you're not a passive participant. You're not just sitting back and listening. You are also an active member of the team. So you want to come in prepared, ready to help, ready to assist. And also, it's not just you and the teacher. Chances are there's going to be other adults in that classroom. Maybe there'll be other teachers' assistants. Maybe there'll be other support staff that are going to help. And so you also want to be able to understand who they are and work with them. So really think about that whole relationship, and that will really set you up for success. Something else to recognize is something that you may not have thought about. So what do you think when we ask our teachers and our volunteer and our AAPS staff, what is the biggest challenge you think they have with volunteers? Well, the biggest challenge they have is lack of communication. So we do not want you to go on the Darth Vader side of communication and not communicate and not tell your contact if you're going to be sick or you're going to miss class because you're too busy. We really want you to be that communication Jedi and make sure to communicate early, often, whenever anything is happening to you, because it's always better for that teacher to know than to be worried that something is wrong with you because you're absent, or all of the students that are depending on you not knowing where you are and maybe being concerned about you. So really make sure you communicate. A great way for all of these items to come together and really start a successful relationship with that AAPS contact is to complete the volunteer educator agreement. So this is something that you will see as part of your onboarding process when you're introduced to your AAPS contact. And all it is a Google form, but it's a Google form that allows you, when you have that initial meeting with your contact, to go over all of the details so that you both are most prepared to work together in the future and that everything is clear. So how can you set up yourself for success? You want to be part of that team. You want to have the teacher be your guide and really be ready to show up. Communicate early and often, be as proactive as you can, and work with your AAPS contact to fill out that agreement so that everybody is on the same page. So now a little bit of information about how to best prepare for your AAPS placement. So first of all, you have lots of tools in your toolbox. We've got this great volunteer guide, as we talked about, all those different platforms that you can research. You can also ask your contact if there's some information that they can find, that you can find for them. You want to use Better Impact for your placement if you're going to be choosing your own placement to log your hours. So you want to get familiar with that tool. You want to complete the volunteer educator agreement with your AAPS contact. And then, of course, be responsible. It is your responsibility to be as proactive as you can about sharing your schedule, talking about if there's any concerns. So really put yourself in that leadership position as a volunteer. So now I want to talk a little bit about Better Impact. You are watching this video, so you've already logged in and created your profile. So some of the things that you'll be able to do in Better Impact is if you are somebody who is in an organization or affiliated with somebody or an individual, you may have the opportunity to choose your own placement, so you can get ready for that. The platform also has a news feature, so we'll be sharing news there so that you can get information. You also get emails. What's also nice about it is if you do have your shifts in Better Impact, you'll be able to view those there. And then finally, you can log your hours. So if your coordinator needs you to log hours in Better Impact, you can do that. So please consult them to see if that is a requirement. So on your first day, how do you best prepare? So we first want you to show up early, and that's because it often takes a little bit more time to get oriented, to get where you're going on that first day. So please allow some extra time. Find the main entrance of the school, another reason to show up early. There'll be a buzzer. All the school doors are locked, so you're going to need to buzz yourself in. And once somebody answers that buzzer, you want to state your name, that you're a volunteer, who you're volunteering with, and what your affiliation is, just so they really understand who you are. And then finally, you want to check in at the main office the minute that you get in and make sure you bring some form of photo ID because they're going to be giving you a visitor badge. And this is going to happen every single time that you come in. So be ready to get into that routine. So how can you prepare for your placement? So we've got some great tools for you to use, so make sure to use them. Complete that volunteer educator agreement. You can tell that we really want you to do that and be ready on the first day. Know how to get where you're going and be there when you need to. So the final piece of information before we talk about next steps is talking a little bit about student behavior strategies, because you are going to deal with students that are going to have different types of behaviors in the classroom. So the first thing that I want to share with you is really thinking about what your role is in addressing challenging behavior in the classroom. So you have not been asked to volunteer to be the manager of behavior. That is not your main responsibility. And this is really something that you should talk to with your teacher. So you should not be expected to address and work with students that have major behavioral issues as part of your volunteer experience. The best thing you can do is work with the teacher who can guide you if there's a couple of students in that class that are particularly challenging, because the teacher really knows the best things to do with that student. So I would say do not assume that you can just get into the classroom and all of a sudden start telling students how to behave. You really need to take the lead of that teacher and understand what is going to work best for them. So some ways to think about student behavior that I think are going to help you set the groundwork for how to work with students is to really understand what needs we all have, no matter who we are, whether we're a kid or we're adult. You know, when we think about the needs that we have, most of us have a couple of basic needs in our lives, right? We obviously need to be safe. We need to feel like we belong. We need to have our sensory needs met. So we need to make sure that we're not hungry. We need to feel successful in the work that we're doing. We need to be able to be understood. So when you're working with students in our classrooms, these are all the needs that you're going to see. You're going to see kids exhibiting these different needs. And the biggest question is, what happens when we don't get our needs met? Well, what happens if you don't get enough to eat and you're in a class or you're at work? You might be hangry and you might not be your best self, right? And so that's going to impact your behavior, all because that need was not met. What may happen if a student is new to this country and is struggling with English and is having trouble being understood in the classroom? How do you think that that student's going to behave? What about a student who may be experiencing homelessness? They may not feel safe, and that's also going to impact their behavior. So as you think about working with our students in our schools, really think about, what is this need that the student may have, and how can I really respond to the need rather than respond to my own reaction, emotional reaction about how that student's behaving. You know, if that student triggers me and I get pissed off, or I think, oh man, that student's a bad student or misbehaving. Let's reframe it and think a little bit more about that student's needs. This is also a really good reason to get to know your students, because that's going to help you along this path. So how do we handle big emotions in the classroom? So we know that your primary role is not to manage student behavior, but that does not mean that you're not going to see big emotions in the moment. So what are some things that you can do in that moment if a student is really upset or anxious or screaming? So first and foremost, you want to be calm. Well-regulated adults are really going to be the best at regulating students. So the best that you can keep yourself calm, the better. You want to let that student cool down. You don't want to try to solve that problem in the moment while that student is still upset or in the red zone. You clearly and absolutely do not want to shame that student in the moment and say something like, I can't believe that you're acting out again. I know that your mom's in the hospital, but like, what's your problem? You definitely don't want to make that student feel like what they're doing is inappropriate, because that's just going to add on. It doesn't mean that you can't stop the misbehavior or stop that student from doing something, but you don't want to call them out in public. And then finally, really important to validate students' emotions. So there's nothing wrong with feeling anger. There's nothing wrong with feeling upset, but there's other ways to deal with that aren't about, please don't throw that pencil across the room. And then talk to your AAPS contact about how you can best build skills with that student so that they can keep working on managing their emotions. So something that's really, really connected to big emotions is trauma. And we do know that there are a lot of students in our classrooms that are experiencing trauma, whether it be as a result of the COVID pandemic, whether it be because they've experienced homelessness, or something as simple as maybe their parents have just gotten divorced and that's been traumatic for them. So you want to be prepared to recognize trauma in the classroom so that you can help support those students who are experiencing trauma. So first, just like with abuse and neglect, you want to know some of the signs, and we do have a link on this slide that is going to help you see how you can recognize trauma and provide support. Really important, the relationship building that we talked about earlier, that's why it's so crucial as well, because the more that you're a trusted adult and a supportive adult, that will help. You want to be that listening adult. You want to show that you care about that student, that they're going to be okay. You want to be and provide an environment that is safe and predictable as possible. This is why the communication is so important. This is why being a consistent volunteer is so important, especially to those students who have experienced trauma. Do whatever you can to help that student feel safe. And then finally, very similar to the big emotions, you want to help that student build the ability for them to self-regulate when they're experiencing some of these traumatic feelings. And this is just about being calm, validating the emotions, but definitely and absolutely working with your AAPS contact to help with how you can build some of those skills. So this is not something that you would do on your own, but something that you would do in concert with and in support with your AAPS contact. So now the final piece of information we can give you, or hints and tips around working with students, is how best to talk to students when you are giving them praise, when you are trying to redirect what they're doing. And so there's 3 different kinds of language that we're going to talk about. The first is reinforcing language. So when you're working with students in the classroom and maybe they were really struggling with a math problem and then they were able to do it because they used one of the strategies that you modeled for them, then you want to give them some positive praise that will help them build on their strengths. And so that's where reinforcing language comes in. We want it to be as concrete as possible. It's not about you. You want to talk about what that student did. And we also don't want to make a student feel like somebody else in the classroom is the best and ultimate example of what perfection looks like, because all students are different. So here's some ideas of some prompts that you can use in the classroom. What made you decide to do that? What helped you do that? And you can specifically say things like, wow, you were able to get that math problem done after really struggling. What made you successful this time? And then help them learn and grow. And so this is really, again, about being that coach and being as positive as possible. So next is that reminding language. So how can you help when a student has been given an assignment or an instruction? How do you help them remember for themselves? The best thing to do is to assume that they heard the instruction. You don't necessarily need to repeat it. You want to really help and guide them to say, they probably heard it, but maybe they need a little bit of prompting to get to know that information a little bit clearer. So be as neutral as possible. So rather than you getting frustrated, really just focus on what you're asking them to do. And watch for follow through, because some students might take longer to do something than others. So here's some prompts. What will you need to do so you can be ready for X quickly? Show me how you get ready to go outside, right? What do you need to do to get your clothes, your jacket on so we can go outside? So you can make sure that the student is understanding what is expected of them. So, you can say, like, what did the teacher just ask us to do? What is your job right now? Show me what it looks like to be ready for the next activity. These are really great ways to help with a student to remind them of what they need to do. Finally is redirecting language. So this is hopefully something that you don't have to use a lot in the classroom, but this is when a student may really be off task and not paying attention in the classroom. Maybe you've tried to use that reminding language repeatedly and they're not listening. So this is what you can do. You really want to be as direct and specific as possible about what needs to happen. You want to say specifically as a statement, this is not the time for questions. So it's time to pick up your book, put your computer down, and pick up the book for the next chapter. We are going to start when you have shown me that you're ready by putting your computer away. There's a couple ways you can say it, but being as direct as possible is really important. So what are some key takeaways to working with and managing and helping with student behavior? You really want to think about student needs. You want to do the best you can to keep yourself calm. It's a really important positive adult role model move. Ask for help from the teacher. That person is really going to be your guide and support. And then do what you can to practice how you can speak in the classroom. This is also a great thing to do by observing and watching how the teacher interacts with students. So now we are ready to send you out the door and on your way with your next steps. So you will want to go into Better Impact and check your badges, because this is the way to see if you are ready, if you do choose a placement, to choose it. So once we clear your background check, you're going to get a background cleared badge. Once you finish this video and take the quiz, you're going to be able to get an orientation complete badge. And once that happens, you should receive an email from us, and then you are ready to move on. So what's the placement timeline? So you completed the application and now you're working on your onboarding. So after you do that, it will be an opportunity once you complete the background check and orientation. If you are somebody who does get placed by yourself, you will be able to view opportunities and select them. If you are in an organization or course where your coordinator assigns you, then you will be assigned and we'll notify you about that, or they will. You will receive, if you've selected your own placement, an email introduction between yourself and your contact, and that will contain information about you that will be relevant to that contact. And then it's really up to you two to take the next step to talk to each other. And you're going to work out the details together. And our goal, once school starts and we've got opportunities available, is to get you placed within 2 weeks of you completing your onboarding. So again, your next steps are completing your onboarding. So make sure you take the quiz after you're done with this video. Check out that volunteer guide full of great information, and then you will select your placement, or you will receive your placement, and you will complete that agreement if that is something that works really well as a way to get to know your AAPS contact. So now again, I want to remind you that in order to get that badge, you need to take the quiz. You need to get at least 50% of the questions right, which I'm sure that you will, because I'm sure you've taken lovely notes as part of this orientation. And I really want to thank you. It is so wonderful to have you volunteering at our schools, and we hope you have a great time. And as always, if you need any help or assistance, you can reach out to us at partners@a2schools.org or through Better Impact. And we hope that you have a wonderful experience at our schools, and we will see you out there. Bye-bye.